Hey guys, and welcome back to Lost Bits, the series where we explore the unused, altered, and unseen content in gaming. So several years back, I made a video covering the first 5 games in the Five Nights at Freddy's series, and to say you guys liked it, I think would be an understatement. So for this video, I wanted to cover some of the games I didn't in that previous one, as well as revisit the older games and discuss some content that I either missed back in 2018 or has since been documented. And before we jump in, I'd like to thank HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. HelloFresh is an awesome meal kit service that brings fresh, high-quality ingredients to your door in less than a week to help you make some delicious meals right at home. And with the provided foolproof step-by-step recipe guide, even if you're a cooking novice like I am, a delicious meal can be ready in around 30 minutes or less. Like honestly, I was surprised I was able to make this. You can customize which meals you want delivered, and they offer a variety of choices from burgers to rice bowls, as well as vegetarian, pescatarian, and even kid-friendly options too. Nearly all of the packaging is recyclable as well, making HelloFresh the first carbon-neutral meal kit, and yeah, if you're wondering, the boxes are cat-approved too. So if you would like to get started with healthier and more delicious homemade meals, use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POGTetraSept16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 surprise gifts to boot. And with all that said, let's go spend some more quality time with our animatronic pals. It's time to find some more Five Nights at Freddy's Lost Bits. Alright, so kicking things off, we have the game that started it all, and first, let's talk about some things that were seen before the game's release that were ultimately scrapped or changed. First up, there's this well-known screen of Chica, Bonnie, and Freddy all looking towards the camera, and by extension, the player. Now this screen was first seen in the game's initial trailer, and despite this image apparently still being found left in the files, as of yet there is still currently no known way of actually getting the screen to normally appear in the game. In fact, despite many people claiming and even swearing by actually seeing this while playing the game, there is zero coding in the game for making the screen ever show up. Next, another thing that was seen pre-release that never made it to the final game is this sequence of Bonnie running down the hallway and then removing his mask to reveal the endoskeleton within. And not only was this really cool unmasking scrapped, but if you've played the game, you know there's only one character that's ever seen Naruto running down the hallway, and that's Foxy. Now apparently this was an intentional red herring of sorts, as in order to surprise players, the game's creator, Scott Cawthon, put this in the trailer to hide the fact that Foxy would actually do this instead. And speaking of this unmasking here, the endoskeletons of Bonnie and Freddy from this trailer and the Steam green light icon respectively look quite different from how they're seen in the model used in the game, and for the rest of the games in the series for that matter. Changes here include the teeth being triangular instead of more square human-looking teeth, the eyes were black with red pupils as opposed to white and blue, and the scrap designs also had nostrils which appear to have been removed from the final versions. But anyways, with both designs here, these are certainly not something that I would want to mess with. Next up, there were actually 2 additional animatronics that were considered for the game but were scrapped. Firstly, before deciding on a fox, a wolf animatronic was considered, and secondly, a beaver animatronic was considered too, but was ultimately decided against as Scott didn't want players to make any sort of connection to a previous game he had developed, Mr. Chipper from Chipper & Sons Lumber Co.
One of the contenders was a fox, obviously, which ended up winning. The other one was a wolf. Another one was going to be a beaver, but then later I decided against that because I thought that was too on the nose from Chipper, so I decided against that. But yeah, actually, if I remember correctly, I really think that a beaver character was the front runner until I finally decided against him because of Chipper and then went with Fox instead.
Yeah.
Next, there are actually quite a few graphics left over from the demo of this game that can still be found left in the final version. In addition to basic demo text, there's also this message thanking the player for playing through the demo, as well as encouraging the player to purchase the game to get the full experience. And then last up for FNAF 1, specifically for the mobile port, there are 2 things that have been updated and removed in the remastered update. First, there's this image of Freddy that was once seen when starting up the game, and then secondly is this clicking sound effect that was once used when activating the lights in the halls. After the update to this game, this was replaced with the same sound that's heard in the other versions of this game. Now moving along to Five Nights at Freddy's 2, first up we got once again some more demo graphics that are found left over in the final release. Although the text is different, the message is basically the same here. Then next up, there's this unused graphic of beakless and eyelidless Toy Chica as she stares into the player's soul. Based on the similarity to the Toy Bonnie graphic that's used when he slides along as you put on the Freddy mask, it's thought that this might have once been planned to be used in a similar manner. And if you've played it, you probably noticed that this idea was basically reused later in Ultimate Custom Night. Then next up is this unused graphic of Puppet getting close and personal. This graphic is similar to the last frame of the Puppet's jumpscare animation, only here this one appears a tad closer and Puppet's white eyes aren't visible here either. And then, just like with the first game, there were also a few things teased leading up to the game's release that were altered. First up, although original Foxy can be seen in the game's third teaser image, only withered Foxy is ever seen normally in Chapter 2's gameplay. And secondly, also in this same image, here we can see that Mangle was also once planned to have a hook hand just like Foxy, as they both appear to be holding the curtain with their respective hooks here. This was for whatever reason changed, as ultimately Mangle is seen with both hands intact. And lastly here, there was actually a small change made to the newspaper graphic that's seen when starting up a game. The phone number's area code was stealthily changed from 888 to 555, and it's believed that this change was made since there may have actually been someone with that phone number and they probably got called a whole bunch by some annoying FNAF kids. So yeah, it was changed to the 555 area code that's typically used in movies, TV shows, and other fictitious works. Onto FNAF 3, following the pattern of the two predecessors, this game once again has some demo graphics left over, and this time the demo message is actually the same as the one seen in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, albeit with a different font. And while on the topic of this font, there's also this graphic left in the files for Night 2 in a light green color. It's unclear if this was maybe once the planned color for the text, but kinda strange that this is only left for the second night. FNAF 3 also contains several sprites of the Puppet left over from the second game, including the unused super close-up one I went over earlier. Then next up, although in the final version of the game you can close vents by double-clicking on the corresponding camera near it, there's actually an unused button left over in the game that was once planned to be used instead. Now I mentioned the associated graphic for this in my previous video, but since then, its functionality and the graphic itself have also been re-implemented, and closing the vents this way actually ends up being faster than normal. Not entirely sure why this change was made, but I guess maybe just having one less button to click on here was the goal with this. And now lastly, just like with Five Nights at Freddy's 1, the mobile version of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 saw a remaster patch, and with it, this image of Springtrap that was once seen when starting up the game was removed, never to be seen again. Now I bet you'll never see this coming, but FNAF 4 once again has some leftover graphics from the demo that otherwise aren't ever used. Big surprise. Then next up, the jump scare sound for Nightmare Bonnie heard in the game's trailer is actually like completely different to how it's heard in the final release. It's currently unclear why this was changed so much. And lastly, the only other thing I think worth talking about here that I didn't already cover in the first FNAF Lost Bits video is that there's this unused ending cutscene that was once planned to have been shown after a player had completed the 2020-2020 challenge mode in the game. Now this animation is very similar to the chest ending that's seen when completing Night 7 or Nightmare mode, where the chest is seen locked, and although this unused animation shows the deadbolts being removed, unfortunately we still don't get to see what's inside the chest. And after over like 7 or 8 years now as I make this video, I don't think we ever will at this point. Then, just like with the other games, FNAF 4 here also lost a startup image for the mobile port when it received its remaster update. Now moving on to FNAF's sister location, surprisingly there aren't any demo leftovers this time around. First up here, there are these graphics of an early position map that would have appeared while in the circus control, primary control, and vent areas. Seeing as how the one vent here is highlighted in blue, it's likely that this was going to be the way the map would indicate which area the player was currently in. And furthermore, both of these appear to be some sort of early layout for the complex, as it appears different, especially on the right side, when compared to the final layout. Next up is a weird oddity that results in an otherwise unseen blue crash screen. By holding down the 0 and 1 keys in the Ballora gallery for a whopping minute and 20 seconds and then pressing 1, this weird blue screen will appear. Its purpose, or whether it even had a purpose to the player, is currently unknown, and despite FNAF games being riddled with secrets due to the nature of how this is accessed, it's believed that this is an unintentional find. Next up, Sister Location actually has a few bits of unused audio. For those still left in the files, there are 2 audio clips meant for the Circus Control Hub room. First is one of the female announcer voice mentioning a motion sensor trigger in Technician Control.
Motion trigger, Technician Control.
And then similarly, a clip of the voice mentioning a glass pressure trigger.
Glass pressure trigger. Please do not push against the glass.
Now apparently, these sound effects were meant to have a chance to be randomly played every 2 seconds, with the Technician Control sound having a 20% chance and the glass pressure one having a 10% chance. Additionally, the glass pressure clip was specifically meant to activate if the player leaves when Baby is telling her story with the lights on, but in the final game you can't exit until she's done talking. And for the Technician Control clip, this was planned to be used when the hand unit first introduces you to the circus gallery while the power is out, something that is not normally possible in the final game as the power doesn't go out until Night 2. Then, although not left over in the game's files, a whole bunch of unused Funtime Freddy voice lines were revealed by Kellen Goff, the voice actor for Funtime Freddy and more recently Glamrock Freddy. Anyways, in these lines, he also revealed that Funtime Freddy would have really been Funtime Frederick, as he was apparently supposed to carry a German accent. But yeah, here's a glimpse at the unused voice lines that were meant for both the game's main mode as well as the custom night mode, respectively.
Hello, little children. Glad to see you back again. Come closer. I'll sing a song for you. Get ready for a surprise! You sure? Okay, let's go get him in 3, 2, 1.
And just like I mentioned with some of the earlier games, the pre-release teaser for Sister Location appears to show some ideas that never made it to the final product. Firstly, there's this image that was shown leading up to the custom night updates to the game showing Bon Bon crawling through a vent. This never happens in the game. And secondly, there's this teaser image showing a total of 5 Biddy Babs, though in the final game, at most, only 2 are present at any given time. Though it's possible that there may have once been a plan to have 7 of these fuckers roaming around, I'm thinking it's more likely this image was just made for dramatic effect. And lastly for Sister Location here, some concept art of Vlad and Clara, the characters seen in the Immortal and Restless TV show in between each night, has also been shared online. Interestingly, as we can see here, the original conceptual design for both characters was quite different to the second style that was chosen. Alright, at first I wasn't going to cover the non-canon spin-off games in the series here, but I covered FNAF World in my first video, so I guess we'll do it here as well. So for FNAF World, first up, the demo graphics return. As leftover from the redundant demo version, we got all of these bad boys. Then next up there's this unused animation of the cupcake bobbing up and down, and apparently this animation is programmed to stop right after the cupcake only bobs once. Next is this party creation graphic that was once seen in the game but has been removed since the version 1.20 update, which introduced more characters, leaving no room for this graphic. There also appears to be an ice cave area that was scrapped from the game, as a preview for the game soundtrack contains an audio track for it. Although the audio never made the final cut, it's thought that maybe the ice cave area was repurposed into the also chilly area, Dusting Fields. And lastly now for FNAF World, there are a few things that were seen in earlier gameplay that were ultimately removed from the game. Firstly, in addition to the overworld initially looking much different to how it's seen in the final, and Freddy having a diagonal walking sprite which he doesn't in the final version, there's a pre-release screenshot of the game that shows Shadow Freddy with the Pizza Wheel 2 attack. Ultimately, this move slot for Shadow Freddy was replaced with the Escape Key attack instead. Then next we got some unused enemy types. These include these unnamed robot bears that appear similar to Prototype, and secondly, mech crabs with a golden shell. For these, it's not entirely clear if these were in fact separate types of the enemy or just an early version of them. Then finally, this screen shows a chip that never made it to the final game, the Slow Start Enemies chip. Now it's unclear why it was scrapped, but apparently it was replaced by the Block Jump Scare chip instead. Now finally moving on to the first game that I didn't cover in my original video, we got Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. And first up here, we got a set of unused graphics relating to the Cassette Man's tape recorder. In the final game, the tape recorder has physical buttons on it that can be used, leaving these unnecessary. Then next, we got this early version of the $100 performance bonus graphic that's seen in the game's Tycoon mode, and then there's also this unused graphic of Molten Freddy that was supposed to belong to the rest of the blueprints that are found in the Insanity ending of this game. And lastly, for the unused graphics here, there's this graphic of a green maze. Seeing as how there's no exits here, this maze graphic is likely related to Henry saying, "A labyrinth with no exits, a maze with no prize," in the Lore Keeper ending of this game. Then next, although in the final version of the game, only one room is able to be edited by the player in the Tycoon mode, there is actually functionality that can still be partially re-implemented into the game, showing that there might have once been plans that would allow the player to unlock additional rooms. Now apparently, Scott Cawthon once mentioned that he might implement an endless Tycoon mode for this game, and some believe that maybe these extra rooms might have been saved for those plans. But yeah, now several years since the game's launch, it doesn't really seem like this will end up being a reality. Next, just like the mobile versions I mentioned earlier, this game also had some things that were updated and removed. Prior to an update to the game, there were these original jump scare animations for Molten Freddy, Scrap Trap, Lefty, as well as Scrap Baby. These were all replaced with improved versions in the patch that have better animation and lighting. And lastly here, based on the graphics used for the Pizzeria Simulator minigame seen in teasers, it looks like originally the retro-style graphics from the Take Cake to the Children minigame from FNAF 2 were originally going to be used. Moving along, next up we got 2018's Ultimate Custom Night. I'm starting to run out of things to say for this, so yeah, there's more leftover demo graphics here as well. Enjoy. But other unused graphics for this game include this leftover animation from Sister Location of Bonnet falling down and shielding her face, as well as this graphic of 2 out of 3 words making up the title of this game. Now this graphic was intended to be used on the game's main menu, but was removed in favor of making room for the challenges, power-ups, and offices buttons instead. Interestingly enough though, even as of the making of this video, one of the screenshots on the game's Steam page still features this unused graphic in its intended spot. Then for the unused Bonnet animation, since there's no bright light mechanic in this game to cause her to back down, yeah, this doesn't go used. Next up, there are several other changes that were made to the first version of the character selection menu. In addition to just adding several characters over time, Nighttime Freddy and the Freddys were consolidated into one slot, as were Bucket Bob, Mr. Can-Do, and Number 1 Crate. And interestingly, 2 characters were removed from the select screen, Endo 1 as well as Candy Cadet. After their removal, Scott Cawthon went on to say that they would be re-added to the game, but in a not-so-hostile manner. And although Candy Cadet did end up appearing in the FNAF 1 themed office as one of the many props there, to this day there is still no trace of Endo 1 left in the game. The reason for this was never given, but I guess whatever idea Scott once had for re-implementing Endo was just never achieved. Then lastly for this game, we got a few more things to talk about in the graphics department. For starters, there are a few instances where, although the graphic is used, a chunk of it is obscured and as such is never seen in full. The first of these is for this graphic of Rockstar Freddy that's normally seen when you get a power-up, though there you're never actually normally able to see the entirety of the graphic as the legs aren't visible. Then next, whenever JJ or Balloon Boy appear in the vent when playing, only their heads are visible, leaving the rest of their body never normally seen. And that appears to be for good reason, as the rest of the graphic doesn't look quite finished. And then also for JJ, when she appears under the desk, pretty much only her eyes are visible, and this leaves her hair and mouth in the full render never normally seen. Lastly, one strange thing Scott Cawthon overlooked when developing this game was the text on Chica's bib. Although it's been fixed in later updates, when the game first released, I guess Scott horizontally flipped these graphics when adding them in, as the text on Chica's bib was seen mirrored. Alright, and last up, like I said earlier, I wasn't planning on covering the smaller spin-off titles in this video, but we're already this deep, so screw it. Let's check out Freddy in Space 2, as well as Security Breach Fury's Rage. So first, for Freddy in Space 2, the game I hear the absolute least about, there are actually a whole bunch of unused graphics, as well as some that are used that once again have some normally unseen details. Firstly, there's this graphic of Fredward cracking open a cold one. Well, since this graphic is placed over a black background, this slurp text that's part of the graphic is never normally seen. Then secondly, for both of the game's ending screens, only the silhouettes of all of the characters are seen as they look off into the distance. But surprisingly, the actual graphics have a whole bunch of detailing that is never normally seen. I do like the silhouette look, but the detailing here, I think, is really cool as well. Then next, there are also several graphics and animations left over in the game that go unused. Firstly, there is an unused animation of what appears to be an earlier version of the Hammerhead puppet enemy, where it appears much taller. Then there's also an early animation for the Ghost Freddy enemy that actually has pupils compared to the final version. And then lastly, for the unused animations, is this awesome programmer art 2-frame animation of a tornado. Then to add to this, there's also this unused placeholder sprite for that same enemy, giving us a crudely drawn glimpse into what it might have ended up looking like had it not been scrapped. And speaking of unused enemies, there's also this unused Gundam, Cyborg, whatever you want to call him, that's found in red with brown hair, as well as in blue with blonde hair. Oh, and don't you worry, we got lots more crude placeholder graphics to go. There's this placeholder version of the mystery item, some Lego blocks, some flowers, placeholder graphics for the Shadow Mask enemy, an early version of the piranhas, a placeholder cannon cupcake that's seen sporting gray frosting instead of pink as the final version does. There's an early version of the Machine Claw, earlier and much goofier art for the Fox Tank, as well as an early version of the Chica Defense Network boss that looks very different to how its final design ended up looking. And on a similar note, there's also an early version of the Mechaplier boss that looks nothing like Markiplier, nor how Mechaplier looks in the final release. I guess maybe there might have been a backup design in case Markiplier didn't want his likeness to be featured in the game. I always love seeing placeholder graphics, so it was awesome to see so much of it jam-packed into this game. And now on basically the polar opposite, lastly, Security Breach Fury's Rage has a total of 3 documented unused graphics. Yes, 3. And to add proverbial salt to the proverbial wound, these unused graphics are literally just rectangles, each in a different color: yellow, orange, and red, which has slightly different dimensions. Yep, that's really it, fellas. This has got to take the cake for some of the least interesting unused graphics that I've ever covered on this series. And on that very high note, wraps up this Five Nights at Freddy's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to check out some of my other Lost Bits videos and consider subscribing to find your way back here in the future. And as always, thank you all so much for stopping by today, and I will see you in a bit.